Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I am here for my LPL Summer Split Playoffs Semifinals Overview and Analysis video. This is a big one. Final three teams have been determined here in the LPL. We know that Billy Gaming is awaiting in the finals, but we have to determine who is going to be facing them in that finals series. The semifinals are massive, lower bracket finals, whatever you want to technically classify them as. This is a big series. Of course, not only is this determining who is going to the finals to compete to be the LPL champion, but we might know by the end of this video which two teams are going to be qualifying through the playoffs for Worlds. You know, we might not. I think that's the more interesting kind of wrinkle into this, is even with a certain win here today, we might not know officially which two teams end up qualifying depending on what ends up happening, but there is a lot on the line for both of these teams, and I'm excited to go over it. If you want to know my thoughts on how we got here, please check out the playlist up in the iCard right now. In that playlist is not only every single playoff series done in the exact same format as the video here today, but also every single series that we've gotten in the summer split up until this point. So please check that out if you are interested in my thoughts and opinions on these teams. I certainly will preview it at least a little bit going into the series, but only one series to cover today, so we're definitely going to lock in, and we're definitely going to be thorough. Again, if you are excited, let me know down in the comment section below, but without further ado, let's get right into it. If you are new here, what we are going to do is go game by game in the semifinal series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the game and a dud of the game for each individual game that we cover, and of course at the end of the series I will be giving a player of the series to kind of tie everything into a nice neat little bow. We will be quickly previewing the finals at the end of this video, but we've already talked about these teams so much over the course of this year, I'm sure that you can probably get a pretty good idea of where my head is landing at. Of course, also, you know, regional qualifier stuff, we're getting a much clearer picture of where teams are going to land, or we might not, honestly, depending on how the outcome ends up going. So without further ado, let's get right into it. I don't want to waste you guys' time too much at the beginning of this video, so let's get into talking about the series. The semifinals, two very intriguing teams. Honestly, kind of similar in terms of playstyle, but definitely not in terms of arc and story to get here. It's the number 3 seeded Top Esports taking on the number 4 seeded Weibo Gaming. And like I said, both of these teams kind of similar in terms of how they want to play the game. They both really like to play through aggressive early game decisions. Both of them are incredibly greedy, and I think that that's kind of what's defined them over the course of this year. Top Esports is kind of the greedy team in the world right now. You talk about a team that, you know, runs through Tian in the early game. He was the MVP in the regular season, and he deserved it. He was an incredible player for this team, but he's not the kind of player that is going to happily give over anything. He wants everything on the map, even when the team is playing from behind. He is not somebody who likes to give over things for free. That is very advantageous oftentimes when this team is in the lead, because they just strangle out the enemy team. They don't allow them to get any sort of resources, and so you hit this 20-25 minute mark and the enemy team is down like 8k gold instead of 5k gold like they would be against other teams. But it is a bit of a riskier style. They rely a lot more on their mechanical differences because they're fighting a lot more from neutral in the early game, and so there are pluses and minuses to that, but for the most part they've just been able to completely run teams off the rift with that decision making because they are so talented. Tian obviously deserves a lot of the credit for that, but you can't really do that without like the bot lane being one of the best in the world with Jackie11 Mako, without mid lane actively stepping up and, you know, having a career year. Cream has completely established himself at the top of the standings in terms of being one of the best mid laners, not only in the LPL but in the world at the current moment. And of course you've got 369 on the top side as well, so you really don't have a ton of weaknesses when it comes to Top Esports, and that's the reason they are kind of considered the favorites to win this series by a lot. And they're certainly my favorites, and a big reason for that is Weibo is just super inconsistent in a lot of key areas. You talk about the solo lanes not exactly being perfect over the course of this year. That's a bit of an understatement in terms of just how up and down it has been. Xiaohu in particular in the mid lane has been kind of the pinnacle of that feast or famine playstyle, and sometimes even the feasting doesn't look all that good. He's just not been all that valuable for Weibo over the course of this year, but especially going into someone like Cream, who has been kind of the consistent mid laner, at least in terms of the tape that we have seen in 2024, there is a real concern that that is just going to be a very lopsided matchup in favor of Top Esports. And then you've got the top side of the map. Breathe has also been very inconsistent. I think it's almost undersold just how bad his bad games, quite frankly, have been over the course of this year, and 369, not the kind of player that's just going to not take advantage of that. And so you really have to watch out for these solo lanes. If they're not going to be able to step up for Weibo, the series is likely not going to be particularly close. It is very important for those players to be on the same page and, quite frankly, in form, because if they're not, then that could immediately spell the end of the series, regardless of what happens on the rest of the map. Light and Crisp are very good, very stable. Light in particular is just going to be a good player. You kind of know what you're going to get out of him. He's been the stabilizing presence for this team. Crisp has had a couple of really bad games, but he's actually been really good in the playoffs in particular for this team. I would expect that to continue, but I've waited long enough. Let's talk about the star of the team, Tarzan in the jungle. This is really the matchup to watch. Obviously, Tian versus Tarzan is going to determine who ends up winning this series. If Tian is able to do a lot of his aggressive pathing in the early game, if he's going to take all these skirmishes around objectives and just get everything on the map, and Tarzan's going to be shut down, then Weibo have absolutely no chance of winning these games. He is way too integral towards how Weibo wants to play, especially in the early game, that if he gets behind, I think it's just doomed. But Tarzan is one of the few junglers in the world that I genuinely think is good enough to just kind of beat Tian at his own game. Tarzan might be even more aggressive in the early game in terms of actively skirmishing, but oftentimes he's doing it on things like Sejuani or like Maokai or a lot of these tank engagers because he can get away with it a little bit more consistently, and what he wants to do is set up the rest of his laners to be able to take over games. That's, again, not to say he can't carry games. We saw him on the Nidalee in the previous series against LNG, actively really stepping up in that game 5 and pushing them across the finish line, and, you know, he can play the AP carries like Brand and Zyra as well, but Tarzan, what he wants to do is move around actively early, so I think a lot of the series is really going to be down to, obviously, these two junglers and how they interact early on in games. If one team can go into the mid game with a gigantic lead, I think that likely will be the team to win the game. So I guess we'll see if that ends up coming true. Of course, Top Esports is the favorite in this series for a reason. I think it would be a pretty big upset if they ended up losing, but the only way to find out is to go game by game, and that means starting with game number 1. So let's get right into it. The winner of game number 1 was Weibo Gaming. They are going to take game number 1. They're going to go up 1-0 in this series, and this is a phenomenal way to establish pressure early on. Obviously, winning game number 1 is really important in a best of 5, just being able to show like, hey, we are going to control the tempo of this series. We're going to determine just how fast we can, you know, move forward in the subsequent games. That's obviously big, but just going out and showing that, yeah, Top Esports can have some good performances in the first couple minutes of the game. They can, you know, get to a 1.5K gold lead at like 6 or 7 minutes just purely off of some decent plays, but Weibo's macro is just straight up better, or at least it was straight up better in this game. They had a much better idea of where they wanted to put a lot of their resources, especially going into the mid game, and they really propelled a lot of their players a lot more than I would say Top Esports was able to do. You got some key underperformances from TES, most notably the solo laners, and it felt like it was backwards a bit in this game, which is really funny, but let's talk about Weibo. Let's talk about the good things first and foremost. As per usual with this team, when they win, the player of the game is often Tarzan in the jungle. He's gonna get player of the game for me as well here. It's just kind of, it's how it goes. Like, he's so integral and so important towards this team's success. I honestly don't know if there is a player in the LPL that is more actively important to their team's success. I honestly think maybe I should have put Tarzan in my MVP finalist voting, just purely because I don't know where Weibo would be without him at the current moment. I know I sometimes get the reputation of being a bit of a Tarzan glazer on this channel because I am such a big fan of his game, and I do think he is wildly underrated by the community as a whole, but he just continues to prove me right, and so I can't really change my tone or my opinion on that because this guy is just absolutely dominant. Going up against someone like Tian on the Lilia and just being able to make significantly more plays, being way more active in the mid game and actively setting up his team a lot better, it's just really impressive stuff. Like, this is elite jungle level play coming out from Tarzan, and it's exactly what you would want to see. The rest of the team was really good as well. I thought Xiaohu was really good on Zeri. We've talked about this before with this champion in particular. For Xiaohu and for Weibo Gaming, he's really good mechanically on Zeri. It's very clear that he's put a lot of time and effort, and he feels very comfortable and confident in playing Zeri. But the problem is that it's Xiaohu that's piloting it, and so sometimes he's just going to be out of position or too far forward or not in the right spot or not playing with the rest of the team because he does have those like mental mistakes, especially in the mid game. When you are able to rein him in and just allow him to do the things things he's good at mechanically on Zeri, he looks really good, and I thought he was really good in this game. Light and Crisp looked good. Light couldn't hit an ultimate to save his life on the Varus, but outside of that, the damage was actually super good from him, and so you kind of have to live, I guess, with the trade-off. I would have loved to see a bit more, I guess, cohesion in terms of maybe setting up some of those Varus ultimates, but at the end of the day, the damage is significantly more important. Crisp was very good on the Braum. Breathe was solid enough on the Cassante to really not make it a huge problem. Weibo was really good, but again, it all stems from their jungle. It all stems from Tarzan. He really is the cog that makes the entire machine move, and I think without him, they'd be in a really rough spot, but they don't have to imagine that world. They're up 1-0 in this series because of him. And then for Top Esports, not the best game number one. Again, it kind of felt like a team flip here because the solo laners just were not good enough. Cream is going to be the one to get my dud of the game, but I think you could realistically give this to 369 as well. Both of them got caught out plenty of times over the course of this entire game in side lanes, just stepping up way too far forward. Cream was really bad in team fights, which we'll talk about. I just felt like the Tristana was not good from Cream, and he's pretty good at this champion. It definitely is a bit shocking to see him have such a bad performance in a pretty pivotal moment because, as I said in the intro, he has kind of been the most consistent mid laner in the region leading up into a series like this, but he is also pretty inexperienced at the top of the standings. He's never made the semifinals of the LPL before last split, and so, you know, there is kind of this idea that, oh, I hope he's not just collapsing under pressure. I don't think that's the case. You know, it's one game. I'm not going to completely throw out all the tape and all the analysis that we've done over the course of this year, but it is at least a bit concerning to see him have such a horrible game number one and get taken advantage of so much by the Lilia and by the Zeri, and just the positioning was really bad, and a lot of gold and a lot of resources went to the other side because of him. 369, like I said, also pretty bad, just got caught out over and over again, was way too aggressive with some of the engages on Renekton. He was constantly trying to 1v3 or just stepping up in side lanes because he thought he could survive. Like, it just felt very weird. It didn't feel like a very, you know, calm, cool, collected game from 369, and quite frankly, that's kind of the player that we've been getting for Top Esports over the past couple of months. He's just not really been that, you know, super stable, weak side player that we kind of knew him as when he was on JD Gaming. So definitely some concern there, but Tian, Jackie Love, Mako, I don't think they were horrible. Tian was doing a ton of damage, but Tarzan was simply better on the other side of the matchup. Jackie Love and Mako didn't even really get a chance to play the game throughout this one in the 2v2 because by the time they were involved in a lot of these plays, Cream and 369 had already given so much gold over to Weibo Gaming, who had much better macro, like I said, so they were getting objectives as well. Just a very weird game, I would say, all things considered, but Top Esports has to turn this around in game two. Obviously, you don't want to go down 0-2 to a team like Weibo Gaming. They can win any game, and so, you know, having to win 3 in a row against Weibo is certainly not an ideal set of circumstances. Is Top Esports going to be able to tie up the series, or is Weibo going to take that dominating 2-0 series lead? Well, the winner of game number 2 was Top Esports. They are going to take game number 2. They are going to even up this series at 1 apiece, and I'd love to sit here and be like, and this is the fight back that we wanted to see. We wanted to see Top Esports, you know, really show up, you know, go even in the first 2 games, take control back of this series, and put themselves in a nice position. But honestly, the only thing I can think about coming out of this game number 2 is that both of these teams played really sloppy in this game. This was not a particularly good game from either team. I think that's pretty encapsulated by the level 1, where essentially it's like a 4 for 2 in favor of Weibo Gaming. Tarzan gets a triple kill, and then he does basically nothing with that the entire rest of the game. As Lilia, and especially for Tarzan individually as a player, I expected him to completely just run things after he was able to get that triple kill at level 1, but it just didn't really end up happening. I do want to give some credit to Top Esports. I think there are individual players that played incredibly well here, but honestly, the hard part was, like, I don't think anybody played great, and I don't think anybody played horrible. I think that there were moments for both of these teams that looked good. I think there were moments for both of these teams that looked bad, but generally speaking, I think this was just a very sloppy game all around. I don't think anybody played particularly well across the entire one. I am going to give player of the game to Jackie Love because he was by far the most important player in the clutch moments. His Baron steal with the ultimate was massive. Obviously, the bullet times in general with in these team fights being set up by the Rel and by the Ornn ult, like, they were really big, and he was doing a ton of damage, but I'm going to be honest, like, some of those ultimates were really bad in the mid game, and his positioning was generally just not very good throughout a lot of this game. And so as much as I'd like to sit here and say that, oh, Jackie Love played this phenomenal game and he's completely back, I thought it was fine. Like, he was the best player on the Rift, but that's only because I thought everybody in the game was making, like, weird errors basically the entire time. He didn't have this perfect game from start to finish. He had these really good moments that he was able to capitalize on, and luckily for him, the moments were in the most important times of the game, and I would much rather have those things happen then than any other time, but it's still worth calling out. You also should give a lot of credit to Mako individually as a support because, you know, the setup matters just as much as the execution at the end of the day. If you have a misfortune with a bullet time and you need to be able to get that off, you have to get the rel engage off in order to set that up, or else things just become a lot more difficult to end up executing on. So credit to Mako, credit to Jackie Love. I thought that they were the most important players in this game, but actually, I'm doing the rare thing. Dud of the game is going to stay on the winning side here. I'm actually going to give Dud of the game to Cream in the mid lane. He's just not been good through the first couple games here. I get that the Zeri scoreline actually looks pretty good. This team invested a ton of resources into attempting to keep him in this game in the mid to late game. Xiaohu was just kind of gapping him in the 1v1. It wasn't particularly close, and I get it. It's Tristana into Zeri. Like, the early game is going to be pretty Tristana favored, but even moving further along into the game, Xiaohu was just straight up better than Cream in the 1v1, and, you know, even Cream getting solo killed by Breathe really wasn't an ideal set of circumstances, getting completely chunked out when he was trying to trade against him in side lanes. It just wasn't a good game from Cream, despite what the scoreline ends up saying. I just didn't see it on tape. This was really not a good mechanical performance from him, and again, he is integral towards this team's success because of just how consistent he has been in holding down the middle of the map. It allows Tian to be more aggressive. It allows Jackie Love to be more aggressive, and so if Cream is going to be losing, all of a sudden a lot more responsibility already falls onto the shoulders of the players that had a ton of responsibility, and so you end up in this circumstance where Top Esports is just in a much worse position. Luckily for them, Jackie Love and Tian and Mako were able to come up in the clutch in this one, but it really was not an ideal game from Cream, and honestly, I just need to see better from him. I need him to be like an actively good player for this team. He needs to play like one of the best mid laners in the LPL. He can't just be a guy that gets carried across the finish line. 369 was fine, Tian was fine. Like, Top Esports was generally fine across the board, against some good and some bad, but it just wasn't a perfectly clean game, and you certainly can say the same thing for Weibo on the other side. They probably should have won this game. Not only did they get a gigantic early lead that they almost immediately threw away by giving Top Esports everything they wanted on the map, but their team fighting was just so sloppy. They were constantly getting caught out in these choke points where Rel plus Misfortune could just immediately delete them. They give over Baron basically just to MF bullet time, like, just because of a poorly timed smite. Like, it's just these weird mistakes that you can't really be making in the semifinals that ended up actively losing them the game. The reason I didn't give Dud of the game to anybody is because I think when you look at the individual, like, mechanical performances, there were a lot of positives to take away. Tarzan got super fed in the early game, and you would have loved if he did a bit more with it, but at the very least, he still was at least trying to be active in the late game. He was going for these aggressive plays, flashing in to try to get like 3 or 4 man ults on the Lily. Unfortunately, he was just missing a lot of those plays. Xiaohu was pretty good in this game. I know his scoreline looks a little up and down, but outside of just randomly dying in choke points at the end of the game and being way too far forward on the Tristana, his laning phase is a big reason why Weibo was actually having pressure at all in the mid game. Like Crisp, they weren't generally the problem here. I think they were doing just fine. Breathe was able to get a couple of solo kills this game, was a big nuisance in side lanes, even if he was getting caught out in some circumstances. Like, it's just really hard to pinpoint one player of Weibo that really ended up letting them down, but unfortunately for them, like, it just wasn't enough to get them across the finish line. They just didn't have the consistency. They didn't have the team fight ability, and they give over a lot of key things just from, again, I hate using this word, but from being sloppy, from being uncoordinated, from not being clinical in terms of their execution, and it really cost them here. They have to step back up in game number 3 if they're able to take that. Honestly, to me, I still feel pretty good about Weibo coming out of this game because it was such a weird one. Top Esports didn't exactly look like they were lighting the world on fire, but that doesn't matter if they go out and win game number 3 because then they're up 2-1 in the series and you're forcing Weibo to win both of the final 2. So a big game number 3, as you guys know, I think it's the most important game when you're tied up at 1 apiece for the rest of the series. So who's going to be able to take it? Well, the winner of game number 3 was Weibo Gaming. They are going to take game number 3. They are going to go back up in this series 2-1. And yeah, this is exactly what we wanted to see in the game before. Top Esports was in an okay position. Even after the early parts of this game, it felt like they actually had control for a lot of this game off the back of 369 just being super fed on the Renekton and trying to play through him, diving the backline and making things a lot more difficult. But if Weibo just stays the course, I mean, look at their comp. They have such an easy front to back to execute as long as Renekton is the only one with gold on the other side of the map, and that's exactly what they did. They went out and executed it, and yeah, they walked out of this with the win just because they were more clinical. I think people were a bit surprised by the outcome of this game because Top Esports was in such an okay spot. It always felt to me like Weibo was going to be able to win this. It just really felt like their comp made a lot more sense moving forward than Top Esports, and that just can sometimes be the make or break way that things end up working out. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the game is once again going to go to Tarzan in the jungle. I think this one is more up for debate than game number 1 was. Tarzan was awesome, but I think Light is the other player that you can really consider here for player of the game because of that Jhin. He was just able to do so much damage essentially for free in these front-to-backs. Of course, Corki kind of being a primary damage dealer in some of these final fights. Xiaohu continues to be really good in this series. All 3 of the first 3 games, I think he's been very impressive to watch, but Tarzan and Light were definitely kind of the standouts for me in terms of the individual performances. Tarzan because he was running the map, and really the setup at the end of the game was the most important thing, being able to control a lot of those objectives. Being able to get that Baron was absolutely massive for Weibo, winning that fight and really negating, I guess, Renekton's gigantic lead throughout the entirety of that late game. A lot of that is on Tarzan, and he just continues to kind of really be the rock for this team. I really don't know what they would do without him because they're all so aggressive or passive in their own ways, and he's kind of the one that links them all together. He can, be passive enough to help Light get into the game. He's not going to, over-rush into these situations, but he's also aggressive enough to make sure that Xiaohu and Breathe have backup when they do want to go and make these plays. And so, just generally, I think Tarzan is such a perfect jungler for the individual players on this team because he's adjusted his style and changed so much over the course of this split. It just goes to show he is an elite world-class level player, like a borderline top 5 in the world kind of guy, because he can do a bunch of things at a top level, and not a lot of players can say that. So credit to him. Light continues to look great. Like I said, Jhin continues to look great so long as you get to play him from a relatively okay state. Light has just been better than Jackie Love, I would say, throughout a majority of this series, and that's going to be something to monitor. If that continues, then Weibo's going to be in a great spot moving forward in this series. Like I said, Xiaohu was very good. I thought Breathe was maybe not as good. Like, there were definitely some not so good moments on the Gnar. I think generally the champion just didn't feel all that impactful, mostly because the Renekton was so fed on the other side of the matchup, and it's always going to be at least kind of difficult to be as useful when you're playing, Gnar from behind. Like, you just kind of have to live with that, but generally, I think Weibo looked awesome in this game. Significantly better than they looked in Game 2, obviously, and, maybe not as good as Game 1. It wasn't quite as dominant as that, but still a very good game, all things considered, and going up 2-1 in this series is gigantic, because you only have to win one of the final 2 games now, and for Top Esports, it's the opposite. You have to win both of these final 2 games. That is a massive weight on this team's shoulders, because they were such heavy favorites coming into this. I don't think a lot of people expected Weibo to be up 2-1 after 3 games. For Top Esports to be on the back foot like this is definitely a bit of a surprise and a shock to the system, I would imagine, and especially because there was a real shot that they could have won this game. Now, again, a lot of people are talking as if they were like the favorites to win this game at 20 minutes. I just don't see that. Like, I really don't see the idea that Top Esports was ever in the best position to be able to win, unless Weibo just completely misplayed down the stretch and Corki and Jhin were just completely destroyed by the Renekton, which I think is just very unlikely to happen. You have a lot of tools to be able to deal with something like Renekton. I mean, the Jhin in particular actually handles that champion very well, and so 369 was never really able to take over. That Baron fight, he ends up diving in and dying immediately, the Renekton 369 that is, and that was basically the end of the game. From that moment onwards, Weibo was able to completely control everything that was happening, and I think the rest of this map was just a little too passive. I think Jackie Love had a couple of really bad mechanical errors. He was out of position a couple of times. I think Tian wasn't nearly active enough. Cream has just kind of been a complete nothing in this series so far, but dud of the game for me is going to go to Mako. A lot of deaths, a lot of times he was giving his life to save the rest of the team, and so I can't really blame him entirely, but both him and Jackie Love were often out of position. If you are giving your life to salvage your AD carry's life, then your AD carry needs to do something with the resources that they're getting from staying alive, but in these situations where Mako just keeps dying over and over again because both of them are overextended, both of them are in bad positions, you have to start asking yourself, what is the point? Why are we doing this? And so I just didn't like how Top Esports played this game at all. I don't really like this draft. If you are going to play this, you need to focus on the middle of the map. Cream really has to get fed in this game, or else you have a much harder time of actually being able to win in the late game, as they figured out. And I think, unfortunately, that just kind of was the reality of the situation. Top Esports is now very much on the back foot. They are one game away from being eliminated here. Obviously, it's not the end of the world if things were not to go their way. We talked about it. If Top Esports wins this series, they qualify for Worlds. If they lose this series, they still can qualify for Worlds without having to play another series the rest of the year, depending on what happens in the finals. But you would love for this team to cement themselves as clearly the number 2 team in the LPL by winning this semifinals, by getting back to the finals and trying to get the revenge on Billy. They have to at least start by winning that game number 4. Weibo, though, has the chance to close this out in 4 games, which would be gigantic. If this team goes from being a team that barely makes Group Ascent to making the finals, especially in 4 games over Top Esports, that would be a massive glow up. So we'll see if they can do it. Who's going to take it? Is this series going to be over, or is Top Esports going to push us to a Silver Scrapes Game 5? Well, the winner of game number 4 was Top Esports. They are going to take game number 4. They're going to tie up the series at 2 apiece, and we are going to a Silver Scrapes game number 5 here in the LPL semifinals. This is what we were kind of hoping for from this series. I think me and a lot of other people thought this was going to be a bit more lopsided in favor of Top Esports, but here we are, a very close series, and TES finally showing up, easily playing their best game of the series up until this point here in game number 4. I've just needed to see this team actually start playing their game where they're able to get everything on the map, and this time, at least unlike games 3, 2, and 1, they're able to get it without giving over basically everything in return. You can talk about, oh, they actually got 6 grubs in basically every game this series. Well, they had to give up all of their lives to do it and all of their pressure on the map to do it, and so was it even really worth it in the end? That's always the question, but Top Esports much more clinical in this game. I think they had a much clearer idea of where exactly they wanted to put their pressure. The critique of this team has been that they are much too widespread in terms of what they want to get on the map, much too greedy, as I said in the preamble at the beginning of this video, but I do think if you are able to take that and kind of focus it in one direction, focus it in one area, you can really create one of the strongest teams and one of the strongest ideas in the entire world, and we kind of more so saw that here, although still quite a bit of grief going around on the side of Top Esports. Player of the game is going to go to Mako. I didn't really have to think too much about this one. You know, JackeyLove was very good at being able to follow up on a lot of the things that Mako created, but for the most part, JackeyLove just continues to not really impress me individually with some of the plays that he's making and some of the positioning that he has in these fights, especially on low mobility carries like Ashe. I just want to see it be a little bit better in the back half of the game, and so Mako being the one to set up basically every pick that they were able to get throughout this game, and they were able to get a lot of picks. That was pretty massive for Top Esports. You guys know I've been kind of on the fence, I guess, about calling Mako the best support in the world for the entire year. You know, there's been some ups, there's been some downs. That series against Billy certainly made me question it more than I had been questioning it in the past because he wasn't particularly good there, but he's been pretty good today. I will say Crisp has also been very good on the other side of this matchup, maybe even a bit better in terms of this. So, you know, we'll see in game number 5. That's definitely going to be a pretty telling one, but Mako is obviously still a player I believe in a lot, especially because the narrative so much last year was, oh, Mako's washed, like clearly this guy's just not playing very well, when I was the one kind of defending him and saying, look at the synergy between him and Uzi. Mako has to do all the things he's not particularly good at in the meta with Uzi because that's just how EDG wanted to play the games out. And so I think Mako really struggled because of team synergy last year. I think he gets in not only a meta that he really thrives in because he is a bit of a jack of all trades type of support, but also on a team that really wants to play around his advantages. And all of a sudden he looks like one of the best supports in the world again. Big shocker. Mako is maybe the best support of all time. Like, he's certainly in the conversation, and he continues to assert that here. I do want to give a shout out to Tion. I thought he was really good this game on the Zyra as well. Easily his best game of the series, in my opinion, up until this point. You know, Zyra can be one of those champions that can be both very good and very bad, and I think especially going into Brand, you're really just hoping that you don't get completely eviscerated in some of these team fights immediately, but Tion is so good at being able to time a lot of his moves and time a lot of his plays that he actually played off of the Rel and the Ashe incredibly well. He basically was kind of a third support in this game. Zyra typically devolves into that, but those ultimates from Zyra, sometimes they're kind of useless. They were not useless in this game at all from Tion. He was amazing in this one to pair it up with things like Ashe ultimate and Rel ultimate to be able to secure kills even against high mobility targets like the Tristana. Cream was much better. Again, probably his best game of the series because he didn't really have any mistakes, and that's definitely a bit of a difference from the first 3 games. I thought the Zeri was good. Definitely the better of these 2 mid laners. We'll get to that. 369 was solid too, but Top Esports looking a lot better. And for Weibo Gaming, You know, obviously you didn't want to drop this game. You still have that like bonus life, if you will, because you won that game number 3, but you do not want to go to a game 5 with Top Esports. So this really isn't the most ideal of situations, and especially because this was probably your worst game of the series. Just out of position, over aggressive. I think Top Esports just played really well and kind of took advantage of some of the weaknesses that we have seen from Weibo that really haven't been punished nearly as much over the past couple of series. Xiaohu is going to get my dud of the game. He's been really good through the first 3, and so I'm going to be a little bit more lenient on him not being so good here in game number 4, but he got caught out quite a bit. He was the recipient of a lot of the pressure from Mako, from Jackie Love, and from Tian. Even Cream, I thought, was better than him in this game. Again, Xiaohu has been really good through the first 3 games, and so I don't want to sit here and say, like, oh, you know, Xiaohu sucks. Like, this is clearly him collapsing back down to earth, but it is kind of concerning that when the games do get slightly more important, that's the moment that he starts to play a little bit worse again. He's got to play like he did in games 3 and 1 in particular in game number 5, or else I'm definitely going to be a lot more critical when we talk about the next game. I also think that Breathe is a psychopath. Like, there is genuinely just no other way to say it. Love that play where he just dives in like 1v4, ends up picking up 2 kills and dying just to try and salvage a play towards the dragon. Like, it's very funny. Breathe is a very funny player. I think oftentimes those plays can either really save or really destroy a game. In this case, it did neither, but Breathe, I just wanted to point that out because Breathe is very funny. I continue to think that Light and Crisp are fine. Crisp in particular has actually had a really good series. I haven't really talked about him a ton, mostly because Light has taken a lot of that spotlight away from him, at least in terms of the first couple of games, but Crisp was noticeably good in this game. He wasn't able to do a lot. His team was face checking instead of him, and not because he was playing slow, but because his team was just playing way too fast around him. Tarzan got a little bit outplayed, but really the brand wasn't the biggest problem this game. Overall, Weibo just kind of got a little bit outskilled. Top Esports actually had a good game, and they actually came out on top, and that's really the concern, right? Is that if Top Esports ends up playing well, they probably should win any game against Weibo, but they're not guaranteed to play well. It's all going to be up to one final game here in a game number 5. I'm excited to see where this goes. One team will be eliminated. The other will be moving on to the LPL finals. Who's going to be able to take it? Well, the winner of game number 5 was Weibo Gaming. They are going to take game number 5. They are going to take this series, and they will be moving on to their first ever LPL finals. It feels crazy to say that, but this org, any iteration of it, has never ended up making LPL finals. They made world finals last year, but they've never had the domestic success that they are looking for. This is the time they finally figure out a roster that is able to get them there, and it's never the one that anybody expected. I had a lot of confidence in this team at the start of the split, maybe not at the start, but like before the split, you know, in my pre-summer analysis, I had them as a top 4 team. I had them as a worlds team, but I did not have them doing this. I did not have them being a finals team over Top Esports in a 5-game set. That feels ridiculous. It is just a ridiculous accomplishment. I'm so happy and so excited for this team, for these players, because they have earned it. The development and the changes that they have made over the course of this split to get here, like it is very noticeable just how much they have improved and just how much these players have sacrificed in order to get here. So you just have to be excited for them. For Top Esports, this feels bad, quite frankly. This is really not the outcome that I think you were expecting. You were pretty big favorites, at least in my eyes, coming into this series, and yes, you made it competitive. Yes, it was a 5-game series, and it wasn't this like blowout or anything. Like, Weibo didn't obliterate you in a series like this, but losing it at all is honestly incredibly disappointing. This team absolutely should be in the finals next to Billy Gaming, and you know, just because they've been eliminated obviously doesn't mean they have to play another domestic game. We've already talked about that because of the way championship points work. We'll elaborate on that a bit more in the outro, but still, like, coming out of this series, I don't exactly feel good about Top Esports, and that's a really bad place to be, because honestly, they were a team that I thought could theoretically win the LPL, like, full stop. They really were that good. This team was basically untouchable before going into playoffs. Their momentum just swings way too fast, and unfortunately, that lands them out of the tournament in 3rd place, but congratulations to Weibo Gaming. Player of the game and player of the series as a whole for me is going to go to Xiaohu in the mid lane. I just couldn't theoretically give it to anybody else. I definitely considered Tarzan. We'll talk about that. Player of the series should absolutely be either Tarzan or Xiaohu. I think it has to be one of the two, but honestly, Xiaohu just being better than Cream throughout 4 of the 5 games of this series was incredibly important for Weibo to be able to win it. There really was a lot of things that they were able to generate in the middle of the map that they aren't normally getting, that they haven't normally been getting out of Xiaohu, and for this to be the time for him to step up, it's just such an important thing to be able to see because, you know, the reputation for Xiaohu is that he kind of folds not only in big situations, but like down the stretch. He's the king of spring. He's not the guy that shows up in the summer split when it matters more for Worlds qualification, but here we are with them going on this gigantic run and with him being the most important player in the semifinals, in the lower bracket finals to get them there in the end. So really happy for Xiaohu. I think he's turned around a lot of haters with the series like this on his signature Lucian pick. Also, worth noting out, Jackie Love never beaten Xiaohu in a best of 5. Genuinely an insane stat. He's like 7-0. Xiaohu is against Jackie Love in best of 5s over their times in the LPL. It feels impossible, but yet here we are. It's just kind of a funny little stat that's been going around. But Tarzan, of course, the other player that I considered, if he had been slightly better here in game number 5, I probably would have given it to him, but he was kind of the weak link of Weibo Gaming in this 5th game, and so I'm not exactly super enthused on that. But game 1, game 3 really won off the back of Tarzan, and again, he is such a centralizing figure for how this team wants to play out their early games. You can't really undersell just how important he is, and so Tarzan, of course, has to get a lot of shout. Tarzan haters are in absolute shambles right now. Again, I know I sometimes get the reputation of being a bit of a Tarzan glazer on this channel because I do really like him as a player, and I think generally speaking, he just is incredibly underrated by the community, but this is the 2nd time in 2 years that he has essentially elevated his team to being a finals team when they really had no business being that. So credit to Tarzan. Breathe is a psychopath, and he continued to be throughout this series. The sometimes feast or famine nature of his gameplay can be good and bad, but it was very good throughout most of the series. Light and Crisp were definitely the better bot lane. Crisp had a great series. I narrowly gave him player of the game here for game number 5. Some of those Alistair engages were literally perfect. I mean, 3-4-man knockups regularly. This was an elite series from Crisp, and Light was very good. Maybe a little under the radar in the back half, but he was awesome at the start of the series, and so you just want to give a big shout out to Weibo for this team to make finals. I think is a huge, huge positive for them. This, again, was a team that almost missed Group Ascend in general coming out of Group D, and then for that team to be a top 2 team in the LPL in the summer split, it's just such incredible, like, fortitude from them, and the development is clearly there. And then for Top Esports, as we said, an incredibly disappointing result. Dud of the game is going to go to the MVP, to Tian in this one. Tarzan was just straight up better than him in this series. Tian honestly wasn't all that good, and I'm going to say that about basically everybody on Top Esports. I would love to sit here and be like, well, at least Top Esports came out of this series looking good because it was close and they put up a good fight, and there were a couple of games they just couldn't quite get this game number 5. That's not really how it was. This kind of was a 4-1. Game number 2 wasn't exactly the cleanest win of all time. I don't think Top Esports played particularly well in this series. I think basically everybody got outclassed in their role, and that's really not a good thing to say. Tian was the MVP that was supposed to come in and drive this team forward, and instead Tarzan showed that he was actually more valuable to his individual team in this series. Cream had his worst series of the entire year here against Weibo and against Xiaohu, a player who should be able to be taken advantage of. Like, Xiaohu has been a problem for Weibo Gaming basically the entire year, and you allowed him to just kind of take over this series and take over these games. Obviously, Xiaohu deserves a lot of credit for that, as I gave to him, but Cream also deserves some criticism for essentially being one of the worst players in this series. Jackie Love and Mako were completely outplayed by Light and Crisp. Jackie Love's positioning was actually really bad throughout a lot of this series. Mako was good. I think he was probably the best player on Top Esports in this series, but there's only so much you can do as a Leona. And then 369, like, he was outplayed by Breathe, like, especially in the 1v1s. It didn't feel good for Top Esports. This didn't feel like the number 2 team just happening to lose a best of 5, once. It felt like a team that got outplayed and that was worse on the day, and that's really not a great place for them to be. Again, they're kind of bailed out by this, championship point system because Weibo going to the finals because of the way that they ended up finishing in the spring split. They actually have not qualified for Worlds just yet. They have to win finals in order to not go through the regional qualifiers, and obviously that's a pretty big uphill battle. Top Esports is still very likely to go as the number 2 seed out of the LPL, but this certainly doesn't incite a ton of confidence for me going to Worlds, especially because it is very likely that this is the last series that they are going to play before the World Championships, and so they are eliminated here, and there are a lot of questions, and honestly, I'm definitely feeling a lot worse about them after the series than I was before, but congratulations to Weibo Gaming. You never really know what can happen. The finals are certainly a breeding ground for potential storylines, and if Weibo is able to bring the same kind of fire that they brought here against Top Esports, then you never really know what could happen. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LPL semifinals overview and analysis video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Up on the screen, the updated bracket. Only 2 teams remain, only our finals to go here in the LPL. It's Bilibili Gaming taking on Weibo Gaming. Certainly not the matchup I expected at the beginning of the split, but I cannot say I am disappointed. This is going to be a really fun one. I hope it's more entertaining than their round 4 matchup. These 2 teams obviously have already played a best of 5 in the playoffs already, with Bilibili crushing them in round number 4. You have to imagine that that's definitely going to be on the minds of these players, and I would have to lean into saying that that's more likely to be the outcome in the finals than it is to be this back and forth. But you never really know with a team like Weibo. They've gotten so much more confidence now. They've beaten Ninjas in Pajamas, they've beaten LNG, they've beaten top esports, and so going into this finals, they definitely have a much clearer game plan. They have a lot more momentum, and so you never really know what can happen, but Bilibili are definitely gigantic favorites for a reason. I would expect this to be closer to a 3-0 in favor of BLG than it is to, a 5-game set that Weibo ends up taking, but, maybe they can win a game or 2 and actually really make this intriguing. I just would be really surprised, even more surprised than the semifinals outcome if Weibo ended up winning. I think Bilibili are gigantic favorites and are likely going to be your back-to-back champions here, but that's my opinion. Let me know if you agree or disagree with that down below. Let's quickly take a look at our regional finals as well. You might notice nothing's changed after this series. It's still only 3 teams that have officially qualified. That 4th and final team, that number 3 seed coming out of the, LPL season, it's still up for debate, even with Weibo Gaming in the finals. Top Esports has more championship points at the moment. Weibo would have to win the LPL and get the number 1 seed in order to skip the regional qualifiers. If BLG beats Weibo Gaming, Top Esports qualifies as the number 2 seed with more championship points, and Weibo goes into the regional qualifier to try to get the 3 or the 4 seed. Obviously, that's not really an ideal set of circumstances for a team that makes finals, but it's how it ended up working here in the LPL. It's what happens when you don't do well in the spring split and you have to kind of redo a lot of things in the summer split. So we'll see how that ends up going. Obviously, Top Esports are pretty favored to get that number 2 seed, with Bilibili being the favorites in the series against Weibo Gaming. But again, let me know if you agree or disagree with BLG being favorites, or if you think the momentum that Weibo Gaming has right now is big and important enough to be able to push them across the finish line. Would love to know your thoughts and opinions down below. But that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We don't only post about the LPL. We will, of course, be covering the finals, but we cover all 4 of the major regions. That's the LCS, the LEC, and the LCK as well on this channel, as the NACL Tier 2 over in North America. So if you're interested in a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.